All right, everybody, and we are back. Hello. So, thought I'd do something a little bit different today. This is going to be certainly more of a casual video, a little bit more relaxed, laid back. I know we are in the midst of our team preview videos right now, so I do have the Houston video released earlier today. I know that, and I do have the Indianapolis video and Jacksonville videos already recorded, and Indianapolis will release tomorrow and Jacksonville the following day. I've been waiting to record further videos after that because of week 2 of the preseason's going on right now, so thought we could wait until after that action wrapped up. The next video is the Kansas City Chiefs, and you've seen some of these videos already. I can go well over an hour for teams like the Detroit Lions. I could very well talk for 3+ hours about the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know if that video will end up being that long, but the Kansas City Chiefs are in action tonight against the Arizona Cardinals, so certainly waiting for the results of that game to make Kansas City's video. So probably tomorrow I'll record that one, but thought in the meantime maybe we could do a little fun video, something more laid back. Um, I've always been a huge stadium nerd, I guess, with the NFL. It's always been something that's fascinated me, really with any sport. So, like NBA, MLB especially. MLB has a ton of really cool stadiums. Um, but NHL, NBA arenas as well. Won't leave them out. But NFL stadiums are certainly fascinating to me because, for a few reasons. One, because they really don't get used that many times of the year outside of NFL events. So we're talking about these massive structures that hold usually 60 to 70,000 people, sometimes even more than that. They take up a large amount of space and are, for the most part, only used obviously the 10 times a year for sure with NFL teams, probably 2 preseason games and then 8 regular season games, although now it could potentially be 9 games in the regular season, but only 1 in the preseason because there's now 17 regular season games and only 3 preseason games. So, other than that, unless a team gets a playoff matchup at home, which even then, a team could only really play at home 2, maybe 3 times now with the expanded playoffs, if, say, a 2 seed ended up having 3 straight home games. I think that's really the only scenario you could see a team with 3 straight home games, or perhaps maybe even a 3 seed now if the 2 seed were to get eliminated. But you're talking about, really, we could count on our hands how many times an NFL team's using their stadium in a year. And beyond that, I mean, you could probably count on your hands how many non-NFL events are held at these stadiums every year. But that point aside, these are quite marvelous structures, and they seem to only be getting even more advanced as time progresses, as the NFL is generating more revenue, really, than ever before. So I am very fascinated with, one, how these stadiums are being built, like where the money's coming from, because that's certainly another debate too. Is it coming from public funding? Are the owners forking out money for it? Are they just taking a historical stadium and renovating that over time? But you also have teams that are in wonky stadium situations, and that could potentially lead to teams moving, as we've seen recently with a team like the Oakland Raiders, for instance, which it really wasn't their fault, and we'll talk about that when we do this ranking and get to the now Las Vegas Raiders. But certainly fascinating that you could have a fan base like Oakland, which is one of the more diehard ones in the NFL, I always thought, at least, and it doesn't really seem to matter. And it all really comes down to the stadium not really even accounting for ownership, obviously, is a huge factor in that as well. But if they don't have a stadium and they can't find a place to build a new one, they could very well just up and leave and move to an entire different state. They could move across the country. Like, pretty much anything's fair game. So I always found that interesting, even as a young fan watching the NFL in elementary school and middle school. Not that teams really moved when I was growing up, but there were a lot of teams that had moved right before I started watching football in like the 1990s, for instance. So just to give a little bit of background on that. And I will say, of course, I haven't been to all of these NFL stadiums. I did go down the list and count. I've obviously only, well, I say obviously for me because I know this, but I've only seen an NFL game at 4 of these stadiums. I've been inside of 5 of them. I took a tour of one of them, as we'll see later in the video, that stadium being SoFi Stadium. But I have seen 11 of, there's 30 NFL stadiums total. I've seen 11 of them from the outside in person, just from like being in those cities. I took a big trip a couple of years ago around the United States, and over the course of that, I was able to see a lot of these stadiums just from the outside. So get a good feel for where they're located within their cities. I certainly find that interesting, like I said, because they don't get used that much. So teams definitely take a different approach compared to, say, their NBA stadiums or MLB ballparks, which get used a lot more, and they take up less space, so they might be in more of a downtown location, whereas these NFL stadiums might be on the outskirts of town, or in some instances even in a suburb of their city. So certainly interesting to look at that, and of course NFL tailgating is definitely has the most traction behind it compared to the other sports. There's definitely more of a tailgating culture for football in America than there is for, say, an NBA game, right? Basketball fans don't really tailgate. Same with hockey to a lesser degree. Maybe that's more of a northern thing, like a Canadian thing, but don't really see people tailgating basketball and hockey games. Definitely not on the level with football. Though baseball, you do sometimes see it for sure because it's the summer. It's nice out, but with that being said, let's just get right into these rankings. So I do rank these based on a few factors. I consider the exterior of the stadium, how the stadium looks from the outside, how it looks just from pictures, or if you're looking at it on the street, or even if you're looking at it from an overhead view, because these are multi-billion-dollar projects at this point. So definitely the aesthetic of it, how it looks, both in terms of just how you see it on TV, because it's certainly a big part of the NFL's presentation. When you're watching a primetime game, how does it look lit up at night? When you're watching it during the day, how does it look in the daylight? Because some of these stadiums certainly do put a lot of effort into just looking cool from the outside. So that certainly is a factor. And I also consider the interior, of course, that being more so how is it for like the fan experience when you go in? And obviously I can't gauge that since I've only been to 4 of these stadiums. Well, really 5. I've been inside of them if you want to count Los Angeles, though I haven't seen an NFL game in action in SoFi, but I got a full tour of it and was able to go down on the field, see all the different levels of the stands. So certainly feel like I have a good feel of what watching a football game there is like for both the Rams and Chargers. Um, with the interior, definitely consider the sight lines. I feel like is the biggest thing. Is there a clear sight line of the action? Are fans able to get a good view of what's going on the field from any spot in the house? If there's not a bad seat in the house, that's good for the interior of the stadium ranking. Um, and there's not like a point system to this. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, this team ranks ahead of this team for the interior, but their exterior is worse. So that automatically negates each other. I think there's definitely a little bit more nuance there. You want to try to take things more into account, just looking at each specific scenario more so than just trying to make everything all right. 1 point for this, like ranking them 1 through 32 for everything and being like, well, this team gets 32 points for this and this team only gets 1 point for this. Now, I think the overall ranking is going to be a combination. And other things I do consider too are the location, because some of these stadiums are in a really cool downtown location and it is really accessible for people who live in that city to be able to just walk there, to be able to get the group of their friends together and easily be able to just like get a car and tailgate there. Whereas some of these stadiums are pretty far from their downtown, or they're pretty just inaccessible. So, and just a pain to get in and out of. I've certainly had that experience firsthand with a couple of the stadiums I've been to, even though I haven't been to many. So definitely want to consider where the stadium's located, because even if you are driving to the stadium, which I imagine most people are for NFL games, certainly you don't want to be waiting in a ton of traffic to get into the stadium. You want to get in there, you want to tailgate if you're getting there early. And sure, you could get there early, but even with some of these stadiums, if you get there right when the gates open, you're still in a log jam. It's still just really inefficient. So that certainly gets taken into account too. And the final thing that was really the major thing I took into account was, what's the fan base, like the home team fan base, like at the stadium? What kind of home field advantage do they bring? Because you could have the fanciest, nicest stadium in the world, but if the fans don't bring a good atmosphere to it, is it really that great of a stadium? Right. And also, like, you could have a pretty crappy stadium, but if the fans are bringing it every Sunday or every Monday or Thursday night, and it really is just a vibrant place to be. I mean, a team could be playing at a high school stadium for all it matters at that point if the atmosphere is that electric. So absolutely take that into account as well. And obviously, haven't been at all these stadiums to really gauge that, but you can tell just based off of watching games on TV too, and what you hear just by what you see in the media or what you read online about which stadiums really are a tough place to play for opposing teams, and which stadiums are a fun place to be if you are a fan, even if you are a fan of an opposing team. Though for some of these stadiums, you might not want to represent your opposing team, or maybe keep it a little more close to the vest. Keep the jersey under the jacket or something. But with all that being said, let's dive right into the overall rankings. I won't bore you with how I rank them for the other factors. Let's just look at the meat of this. So in last place is a stadium that I have actually been to, and that's FedEx Field in Landover, Maryland. Now, it's funny because I've actually been to FedEx Field on two different instances. The first time being several years back, I believe it was 2018. I believe it was the year following when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. And went there with some friends, and it was actually a pretty good time. Like, I'm not going to lie, we really enjoyed ourselves there. Granted, I will say about FedEx Field, it's kind of located just in the middle of nowhere. It's surrounded by just a bunch of trees and a bunch of parking lot. Like, it's a stadium surrounded by a parking lot, obviously, as I imagine most of these are, but the parking lot is then surrounded by trees. It's not like it's in the middle of a city or anything, certainly not in Washington, D.C. But I mean, as a result, like the tailgating atmosphere is pretty chill. It's very lax. Like, it's honestly a solid place to be, just to chill for a few hours before a game, crack open some cold ones, throw the ball around, grill some food. But the parking, I will say, I guess I'll go to the second time we go there then, because the parking situation is a little weird. Like, they're very strict about like when they let you in there. I mean, obviously Eagles fans, I'm sure, are we get there very early. It's funny because the last time I went there, it was actually the game in 2021 where the game where the zip tie fence ended up collapsing over the Eagles tunnel, and the Eagles fans nearly fell on top of Jalen Hurts. It was that game, but we went back that time with, I believe, largely the same group of people. And the first thing before we even get to the stadium, the parking just an absolute nightmare to get in there. All the Eagles fans get there like bright and early in the morning because we're Philly fans and crazy. We just want to tailgate, but the Washington Commanders staff like would not let people in the gates until I forget what time it was. It was maybe like 10 or 11 a.m. It was starting to get like it was like decently close to game time, but they ended up just sending people to kind of just like these side streets around the stadium, and we're kind of just idling, waiting for them to let us in. And even once they do let you in, parking costs like I think it was $100 or something very close to that. It was like I thought parking at Lincoln Financial Field was brutal in terms of price, but at FedEx Field it was somehow even worse. Then by the time you do get in, I mean it's not a bad atmosphere once you do get into the parking lot, but then you get into the stadium itself, and I will say for FedEx Field specifically, the tickets are very cheap compared to other stadiums. At least I will give it that, and it is because the place is a dump. But you get what you pay for, and I do think it's more accessible for fans who just want to go to a game and experience it. But even then, we got some pretty good seats. It was like first row in the upper level, but the whole time it just reeked of sewage in our entire section. I don't really know what that was about, and I'm not really somebody to like nitpick too much. I have a pretty high tolerance for the unpleasant, I guess. Like I'm willing to put up with a lot, but it definitely was just kind of a distraction the entire time we were there. It was just smelled like a sewage pipe, like or smelled like a sewer, like some plumbing got backed up or something. Which, funny enough, the following season, a pipe did end up bursting on a group of fans. Which, honestly, when I saw that, I'm like, well, I'm not surprised. But yeah, FedEx Field really not a great stadium overall, and I really don't think there's any like outright egregious stadiums in the NFL at this point. Because FedEx really isn't. It's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, it is a dump compared to these other NFL stadiums that are being built now, but if you look at compared to something like the Oakland Coliseum that the Raiders were playing in just a few years ago, certainly FedEx Field looks fantastic compared to that one. But moving along from FedEx Field, I will say Washington, now that they have been sold to Josh Harris, funny enough, the Philadelphia 76ers owner, um, he's likely going to build a new stadium. Hopefully for the fans of the Commanders, he builds it actually in the District of Columbia itself, in the actual city of Washington, D.C., to make it more accessible. I know they have been throwing around the idea of building it on the site of the old RFK Stadium. That would certainly be cool. Because you look at the other stadiums in Washington, D.C., like Nationals Park and the arena where the Washington Wizards and the Capitals play, they're right near the downtown, and Washington, D.C. does have a really nice, like, walkable downtown, so it'd be cool if they had their football stadium there, too. It'd just really be more of an environment, I feel like, than Landover, Maryland, because Landover's kind of just out in the middle of nowhere. And like I said, I understand, but for the perspective of they don't use that stadium as much as they use the MLB park or the NBA stadium, but hopefully they end up having a nice upgrade in the near future. I certainly believe by the end of the 2020s we will see a new Washington Commanders stadium. And who knows, it could end up being one of the best ones in the NFL, so certainly subject to change on this spot. Certainly could be something in the pipeline. Now, moving on to 29, this is not a stadium I have been to, so I can't really speak as much about it. And that is now known as Paycor Stadium of the Cincinnati Bengals. And this may be a bit of a surprise because I really don't think there's anything too bad about this stadium. And like I said, there really aren't any stadiums in the NFL now that are outright bad. Like if we made this list a few years back, the Oakland Coliseum was an outright bad stadium. It is a stadium that is severely dated and needs to be replaced. Like it is actually falling apart. It doesn't have that charm of being so old that it's cool, like some of the other stadiums we'll mention on this list, or even in terms of baseball stadiums like a Fenway Park or a Wrigley Field. But honestly, I kind of, if it weren't so far away, I would like to go to the Oakland Coliseum while the A's are still there just to see what it's like, because I've seen videos and pictures on YouTube and heard the horror stories, but like that's a stadium that's outright bad. I don't think any of these ones are, although FedEx Field is certainly pushing that boundary but as with each passing day. So now on the Paycor Stadium. Really don't think there's anything bad with this stadium. Just don't really think there's anything too notable either. Certainly doesn't seem like the sightlines are bad. It's one of those stadiums that has, like, the upper deck doesn't go quite all the way around. Let's see if I could pull up some pictures here for me to reference just to explain to you guys what I'm talking about. So, yeah, it doesn't look like the upper deck connects, which is certainly one of the more frustrating things to me with some of these NFL stadiums. Granted, I understand from the perspective of sightlines, you don't want the seats on the corners, you don't want that upper bowl, because that could certainly make fans feel further away from the action. And I certainly understand that, especially at a place like a FedEx Field has that bowl feel to it, and the stadium we're actually going to mention at 28 after Paycor has that same problem. But with a stadium like Paycor, I do have a problem where the upper deck of one side doesn't connect to the other. And that's something that, like, even for my hometown team, the Philadelphia Eagles, was a problem for so many years. where like if you go to the upper deck in the wrong part of the lower section, like if you take like the wrong staircase upstairs, you can't get to your section, so you have to go back downstairs, around, and then up the correct staircase to your section. And I know you could say, oh, well, just don't be an idiot. Take the right staircase the first time. I understand, but for a project as large as these NFL stadiums are in scope, you'd think they could at least just put like a walkway around the outside of the upper deck to connect these things. Um, Granted, I do think having the open air end zone is a pretty cool feature, which I will mention with some of these stadiums, but Paycor doesn't even really seem to do that. It seems like on one side they have a more traditional upper deck, but then on the other side, the lower bowl just kind of keeps on going, and then they put the scoreboard above it. So it doesn't really seem like a bad place to watch a game. And I will mention in terms of the location, it's next to the river. I believe it's the Ohio River, but it is on the riverfront. But other than that, that stadium, along with Great American Ballpark, where the Cincinnati Reds play, it's kind of just isolated from the remainder of Cincinnati by way of highways. Granted, you want to do have some good freeway access to the stadium for sure for people driving in, but it's kind of just cut off from the rest of the city in its own little bubble, which is a little odd. I thought just looking at it from a map, but nothing really outright terrible about this stadium by any means. Just doesn't really seem like a very exciting place to be. The interior just looks very bland. Um, and this was, granted, the Bengals aren't one of the more luxurious and prestigious franchises in the NFL, so certainly their ownership isn't putting money into the stadium. I know this is one of the stadiums where Bengals ownership took pretty much every penny from the city of Cincinnati, so they kind of just, all right, here's your tax handout to the billionaire owners, then we just won't put our own money into it afterwards. Just seems like that's the case for me from what I'm looking at it. Just seems like they got this thing built around 20 years ago when a lot of other teams got their stadiums built with city funding, and since then they really just haven't put much into it. And I do know too with the stadium for many, many years, it doubled as the Bengals practice facility. They didn't even have their own um, weekday practice facilities or day-to-day facilities. They just use the stadium for their practices, which is kind of crazy that they be practicing here like rain or shine. Like it's not like they have an indoor facility either. Like this is just where they played every day or practiced every day. So Paycor Stadium coming in at number 29. If any Bengals fans have been out there, any non-Bengals fans have been to the stadium and had a fantastic experience, I would love to hear about it. Nicknamed the Jungle. Um, I would love to know about the fan bases too. Like, do the Bengals fans really bring it to the stadium? Is this like an electric atmosphere? I really haven't heard anything about that in terms of this being like a really cool place to go just for the fans of the home team, but I can't imagine it's bad either. Cincinnati fans don't seem like, well, I wouldn't consider them in like the top tier fans. They definitely don't seem like one of the more fair weather ones by any means. So that being said, we'll move on to 29. Sorry ahead of time, like this video is already 23 minutes in and we've just done two teams, so this could definitely be a really long one. Moving on to number 28, this is another stadium I have been to, and this is MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Now, this is one of the newer stadiums in the NFL, so certainly you would expect a little bit more, and this is the stadium in the largest metro area in the U.S., largest city, representing New York City. Of course, the New York Giants and the New York Jets play here, but that being said, this is another stadium that it actually wasn't funded with city funding. It was a joint project between Jets ownership and Giants ownership. So each team owns a 50-50 stake in the stadium. So that's why when you look at the stadium from the outside and even on the inside, it does have a very vanilla feel to it. There really isn't much personality here at all. That's why it's very gray, very plain Jane. And honestly, if I want to go backtrack to the Bengals stadium for a second, I will say like that, I know I kind of alluded to it, but that's absolutely a factor in why that stadium's as low as it is, because for a stadium that doesn't share with two teams like MetLife, it looks the same as MetLife in terms of just being very vanilla and not really having much going on. Like, it doesn't have any orange or black really. It's kind of just like gray and bland and not really much excitement going on. But same thing with MetLife Stadium, though I do give it a bit of a pass because it hosts the two teams. But looking at this thing from the outside, it really does just look like an air conditioning unit. And I mean that with no disrespect to the engineers of this stadium and the architects, but it just doesn't look like a fun place to be from the outside. And it's just surrounded by, I don't even know what it's really surrounded by, a bunch of highways and just warehouses. There is a theme, like a Nickelodeon theme park or something nearby, which is a little bit interesting. But you look at this place on the outside, especially, I have been to this stadium twice as well. I've been there for an Eagles-Giants game, and then last season when the Eagles played the Jets, or geez, I believe 2 years ago now. I want to say it was 2021. Whenever the Eagles last played the Jets at MetLife. And again, not a bad tailgating atmosphere either by any means. Honestly, I might say FedEx has a better tailgating atmosphere though, if I'm being honest. Though I will say, leaving the stadium at the end of the day, it just looks like a wasteland when you're leaving. Just like trash everywhere, which I mean, I'm sure that's the case with every NFL stadium, certainly Lincoln Financial Field, but because there's just nothing around this stadium, it just looks like a post-apocalyptic like wasteland. I don't even know how else to describe it. Just looks very unpleasant. And then in terms of the interior, I will say with FedEx, it is just a bowl, another bowl type of stadium like FedEx. I'm sorry, MetLife. I don't know if I just called it FedEx there again, but with MetLife, it is another one of these bowl stadiums, much like FedEx. And granted, that does lead to some poor sight lines. It does lead to fans feeling a little bit further away from the action compared to some of the other stadiums where they don't have the seats go all the way around. I do like how enclosed this feels. I like it. It's just a bowl. It's a football stadium. You're there to watch football. There's really nothing too much else to this stadium. It doesn't try to wow you with the bells and whistles. You're there to watch a football game, and that's all there really is to it. So, again, and I will say, like, it is a newer stadium, so you go in there, and it does feel, at the very least, new. It doesn't feel like an outdated hunk of junk like FedEx Field does. It doesn't feel like this thing's just been sitting on this plot of land since the mid 90s. This stadium opened up in 2010, and it certainly feels like it. It feels like, while there really isn't anything exceptional in there, it's at least been kept up with. So I'll give it that. And, you know, you're there to watch a football game, so that's the bottom line. Not a bad place to be by any stretch of the imagination, but just so many other stadiums out there with cool quirks and personality traits to them that it falls at 28. So, and like I said, this is a newer stadium, so I imagine as the years go by, it'll probably stay near the bottom of the NFL stadium hierarchy. So, that being said, we'll move on to number 27. And this is a stadium I haven't been inside myself, but I have seen it in person from the outside. And that's in Chicago, Soldier Field. So, this is one of those stadiums that it's actually the oldest stadium in the NFL, originally built in the 1920s, although in the early 2000s, of course, they did pretty much a strip down of the interior and built it back up. And it's been seen, that project's been seen largely as a failure, really an abject failure, especially now that the Chicago Bears are really looking to move to the suburbs, funny enough, to Arlington Heights on a former racetrack to build a future home in probably by the time we turn the decade to the 2030s, somewhere around there, they'll be looking to make that move. But certainly find that fascinating because I do love Chicago as a city, and it's one of those cities where it feels very, I don't really know how to describe it. It's a very three-dimensional city. It's very, very large in terms of area. I guess I'll say that. But at the same time, the public transit is superb. And of course, people are driving as they will in a very large city like that. But it's very easy to get around. And there's certainly a lot of people who don't own a car who are just walking and taking the trains. And Soldier Field's located right in the downtown of Chicago, right near the Loop, as they call it, where all the trains kind of intersect. And it's right on the waterfront of Lake Michigan. It's really in a beautiful spot, a lot of green space around it, but at the same time, very close to the downtown of Chicago. Really just an excellent location. So it's really kind of a bummer that they're going to decide to move on from this location to move to the suburbs. I really don't agree with that. And they'll probably be building a dome at their future site, which is kind of unfortunate because while I do think some of these northern teams certainly need a dome to protect them from the elements, Chicago is one of those ones where you like seeing a good snow game at Soldier Field. And I certainly believe there are other teams on this list as will go along where it's like a nice snow game in December, even in the playoffs in January. It's just part of their culture. You really like to just see that as part of their identity. And I think Chicago definitely has this identity as a cold weather team. But as for Soldier Field itself as it stands right now, just really unimpressive in terms of the actual structure itself, I should say. I'd say the biggest thing that really stands out to me is on one side you just have this massive upper deck that kind of just goes on forever, and it just doesn't seem like a good place to watch a game from. Seems like if you're sitting in that section, like you're really far away from the action. And for these guys towards the edge, like it just seems like they have a really tough angle of the field and they're even further away. And it doesn't look like this connects to the other side either, so that's never a plus in my book. And again, just really not a lot of personality to the stadium in terms of the structure itself. And again, that's not the worst thing in the world. You're there to watch the Chicago Bears play. You're going to be tailgating before the game, just having a good time with your buddies, and that's really what it's all about. But I do get the reason this stadium isn't lower is because of the location. I think the location is absolutely superb, and of course the Bears fans themselves, absolutely. Chicago fans are one of the best 4-for-4 sports fans in all of America, honestly, or North America, I should say. And the Bears are no exception to that. They love the Chicago Bears, and certainly a fantastic atmosphere in terms of just the fan base there. But I'll have the Chicago Bears and Soldier Field come in at number 27, unfortunately. So if the Bears did build a new stadium on this Soldier Field site, I think it would be maybe even near the top of this list because I do believe this site is superb. But we'll see what their new stadium looks like in Arlington Heights. Probably going to be a dome, though. Honestly, I think if they want to go that route, at least make it a retractable roof or something. I don't know. Just seems like kind of a bummer to make the Chicago Bears a dome team. Like, they're not a carpet team. That's Minnesota and Detroit in that division. The Bears and the Packers, they're old school. They play outdoors in the elements. So we'll see what the future holds for the Bears. Moving on to number 26. I'll try to make these a little bit quicker, I promise. But number 26, we have the Carolina Panthers and Bank of America Stadium. Now, this is one of those ones that really just pretty unremarkable. It's one of the older new stadiums in the NFL, built when the Panthers came into the NFL in, well, actually 1996. They didn't play there their first season, but this stadium's a little interesting to me just because, again, this is another bowl type of stadium, but doesn't really have any canopies or anything over top of the crowd, so if it were to rain or something, the people in attendance are completely exposed to the elements. Does look like they have a nice jumbotron there above the end zone, but nothing really much to this. Doesn't really seem like the sight lines are great. Looks like if you're in one of those upper deck corner seats, it could definitely be a bit tough, but I will be honest, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for this stadium just because, like watching it on TV, I guess, just seems like with these bowl stadiums, just seems like a very intimate place to be. You feel very much attached to the action. There's not really many distractions there. You are here to watch football, plain and simple. You're not getting distracted by the skyline or any like props or amusements that the stadium has, or you're not really there for any of the glitz or the glamour, not being distracted by a huge jumbotron. You're there to watch football. That's all it really is. And usually with stadiums like this, granted I haven't been to a game at Bank of America Stadium, but typically with stadiums like this, the ticket prices are cheaper too because you're getting what you pay for. And if you want to just go to a game and see an NFL team, see your team play on the road, like this seems like a solid place to do it. Seems like it's not really difficult to navigate. Seems like it's pretty easy to get around because it is just that bowl shape. But At the same time, nothing really remarkable either. And it is in downtown Carolina, so not really too inaccessible to people who do live in the city, but at the same time, pretty accessible for people who live outside of the city in both North and South Carolina. So, all in all, like, solid stadium, but there's just so many good ones. That's why it's going to come in at number 26. Really, that's what another reason I really wanted to do this list, because there, besides FedEx, really, of course, as I'll mention, there really aren't any outright bad stadiums in the NFL right now. So, if a stadium's low on this list, it's not a slight against them. Certainly not a slight against them. It's just because there's so many remarkable works of art out there that we'll be talking about as we go along, and so many fan bases that really bring these stadiums to life. So, moving along to another newer stadium in number 25, and this is Levi's Stadium in technically Santa Clara, and that alone is a massive reason why this stadium is ranked where it is. Now, granted, I live on the East Coast, so I'm probably not going to go to Levi's Stadium anytime soon, but have seen this game on TV many times and have certainly heard about people whine about the location of this stadium. This is a stadium that, compared to Candlestick Park, which was in downtown San Francisco, and I have been to San Francisco, very walkable city, um, certainly a far cry with Levi's Stadium. You're asking people who live in San Francisco proper to drive nearly an hour to see a team called the San Francisco 49ers. And I certainly do believe that when this stadium was built, 49ers ownership or whoever was behind this project in NFL league circles had in the back of their mind the potential of the Oakland Raiders leaving. So this stadium is certainly more accessible to perhaps some of the former Raiders fans. And while I don't think Raiders fans are going to jump over to the 49ers, maybe younger fans growing up who do live closer to the stadium, who might have been Raiders fans in prior generations, had they grown up in prior generations, maybe now growing up in the 2010s and 2020s, they might be San Francisco 49ers fans. So, in terms of the structure itself, it's kind of a mixed bag, because one thing I have noticed with the stadium as well, I've heard people gripe about, all of the luxury boxes and club boxes are on one side here, and that is the side facing, like, their back to the sun. So all the people in the luxury suites and boxes are in the shade, whereas all the peasants on the other side here, all of us common folk who want to go see the 49ers play, have to bake out in the sun, and doesn't even have a canopy on this side. So these guys are really just kind of thrown into the fire over here. And then, of course, your only other alternative is to sit on the end zones or the corner, which even the corners, it looks like, are exposed to the sun as well. So certainly seems like a stadium built for the Bay Area elite in mind. And sure, if you're a fan who works a wealthy career out in the Bay Area and you have season tickets to the 49ers, your company has season tickets to the 49ers, and getting to rock one of these club boxes or luxury suites seems like a pretty cool place to watch a game. But otherwise, if you're in one of these other seats, really doesn't seem like anything too remarkable. Kind of seems like very much like a tale of two experiences depending on what side you're on here. So for a stadium that is one of the newest stadiums, I believe this is actually the newest outdoor stadium in the NFL. So the fact that this stadium is really not as remarkable as, for a stadium that was built in 2014, I feel like there really should have been more imagination brought to the table, or at least more consideration for the common fans attending these games. But I get it, they make their money off of the luxury suites and the businesses buying those season tickets up. So I guess it is what it is, but the ranking is what it is too. They're near the bottom of the list, and sorry to the architects of Levi's Stadium, which doesn't seem like a very fun place to watch a game. Certainly the location doesn't help either. Moving along to 25, so here I will mention not the Baltimore Ravens, sorry, they'll be 24, we're talking about the Tennessee Titans and Nissan Stadium. Baltimore will be next, but we'll get there. 24 is the Tennessee Titans, and this is a stadium I have seen too from the outside, and it's a stadium that's right near the downtown of Nashville, Tennessee, right across the river from their main strip going on there. So certainly a walkable town, although a lot of people are certainly driving to the stadium. But it's a great place for any people coming in for visiting fans who want to spend a weekend in Nashville. You get to see your hometown team play against the Tennessee Titans, and then you could spend the weekend just hanging out right across the river there on the Nashville Strip on Broadway. Just really have a good time. So, love the location here as well. I will say they are going to be building a new stadium right next to the old one here. So certainly Nashville could be near the top of this list in just a few seasons. I believe in 2026 is when that stadium is going to be up and running. But as of right now, Nissan Stadium itself, not a bad unit by any means. This is another one of those stadiums built in the late 90s, but I will say with Nissan Stadium, it does have more personality to it, I feel, than some of these other older stadiums. I love what they've done with the lights, like how the lights are red and the contrast between like the lower decks blue, then the club levels red, the upper decks blue, then the lights are red. It really looks just nice, like from the outside, even though it's not a very remarkable stadium compared to some of the ones that have been built in more recent years. But for one of these stadiums built in the late 90s, I feel like it really does hold up, and really is kind of interesting to me that they're going the route of building a new stadium to replace it already. Say already, I know it has been 25, going to be pushing 30 years by the time the new one's built, but this to me really seems like one of those stadiums that if they wanted to keep it around for a little while longer, it'd be perfectly fine. And the interior seems like a good place to be. The upper deck doesn't connect, but with that being said, the sight lines look great. Looks like there's not a bad seat in the house in the stadium. And I do love this is one of those stadiums that has the open end zones. It doesn't have any sort of upper deck on the end zones. You just have the seats in the lower bowl. So while the upper decks don't connect, it's pretty point blank. You have, okay, this sideline and this sideline. That's it. No 3, 4, 5 different chunks that you have to walk up, and if you go up the wrong stairwell, then you're kind of screwed. It's all right. Are we on this side of the Titan sideline, or are we on the visiting sideline? That seems pretty black and white to me, and pretty straightforward and easy to comprehend. So, Nissan Stadium, not a bad unit at all. Um, definitely Definitely going to be ashamed to see this one go. And maybe before this one gets knocked down, try to see a game there, but unlikely. I don't really live too close to Tennessee. As you know, I'm an Eagles fan, so it's a bit of a ways away from me. But definitely going to be a bummer to see this one go. So moving along, as I alluded to earlier, go to Baltimore at number 23 with the M&T Bank Stadium for the Ravens. Now, funny enough, even though I do live pretty close to Baltimore, I have never been to the stadium, and I don't believe I've even seen the stadium from the outside, but certainly seen the Ravens play a lot of games on TV over the years, and know what this stadium is about in terms of the fan atmosphere and what it brings to the table as a structure. So, looking at this stadium, again, really nothing too remarkable. This is another stadium that I wouldn't really call it a bowl stadium. It's very close to being so, but the upper decks are a little bit disjointed. But I think that is to its benefit in terms of the sight lines for sure. Definitely seems like a place where it strikes a good balance between being a stadium that doesn't have a bad seat in the house, but it still has that intimate feeling of one of those bowl stadiums like a FedEx or a MetLife or a Bank of America stadium where it's about the action on the field. You're not being distracted by anything else. And yeah, it doesn't have like any fancy canopies or partial roofs or retractable roofs or fancy jumbotrons. It knows its role, and you're not distracted by the skylines or anything. You're focused on the action on the field. Love the purple seats. It's themed much like Nissan Stadium. I feel like the colored seats really go a long way in more of these plain Jane stadiums. Really what sets apart a stadium like M&T Bank here from a stadium like Paycor, although Paycor I do feel doesn't have a very good aesthetic in terms of how the seats are laid out either, as I mentioned. But M&T Bank seems like a good place to watch an NFL game. Just seems like a very, very solid NFL stadium. Really not too much else to say here. I will mention with this stadium too, watching games here at night, the stadium really does pop. It really stands out at night. I don't know what it is about M&T Bank Stadium, but watching like a Sunday or Monday night game here, especially when the Ravens are good, which they usually are, but watching a big primetime game here always just has a certain juice to it. I don't really know how to explain it. Maybe it is just because the Ravens are good and their fans are very passionate, but I like this stadium. Definitely an underrated one. And the fact that I do live so close to it, maybe the next time the Eagles play there, would love to get out to see the Eagles and the Ravens play here. They did just play in the preseason there last week, which is a shame, but I'd like to see a regular season game here for sure. Moving along to number 22, and this is another late 90s stadium, this one being Jacksonville Jaguars home, known as TIAA Bank Field. So this is one that, or did they change the name maybe? I'm trying to look for it here on the list of stadiums. But yeah, the Jacksonville Jaguars Field, Everbank Stadium, excuse me. So Everbank Stadium, this stadium is, I mean, I've never been to Jacksonville, Florida, so I haven't seen this one in person, but seems like a pretty chill place to watch a game. I know they do have the swimming pools here, and it is located in a very central spot in Jacksonville. It looks like right where the Three Rivers merge, or not Three Rivers, this is in Ohio. Right on the riverfront, they have one river there. At least that's along, but in a pretty central location in Jacksonville, certainly seems like a nice place to watch a game. And this is the only pro sports team in Jacksonville, so the fan base atmosphere is certainly going to be there. Reminds me a lot of Bank of America to a degree. I know the Jaguars and Panthers did come in at the same time, but Jacksonville does have more of an open end zone sort of feel than Bank of America. It looks like they have three different levels here. So they have their lower bowl, which goes all the way around. Then they have a second level, which goes 3/4 of the way around. And then a third level, which is just on the two sidelines. And then on one side, opposing to the one where there is no second deck, they have sort of an open scoreboard, which I always like that with these outdoor stadiums. Definitely gives it more of a contrast to, well, I do like the enclosed feel of like a M&T Bank Stadium. For a team like Jacksonville in Florida, definitely gives it a nice, more laid-back vibe. And while it isn't really an intense atmosphere, I wouldn't say going into Everbank Field's really like oh, it's such a difficult place to play. Just seems like a really chill place to go watch a game. Seems like a fun place to just go hang out. And maybe that's not the best thing in terms of watching an NFL stadium, but or watching an NFL game at a stadium, but seems like I'd have a good time here. Just seems like a fun place to be, and certainly has a little bit more personality, I think, to it than some of the other stadiums we've mentioned on it so far. Certainly the swimming pool helps. Love the open scoreboard here on the one end. Certainly very large and prominent, but nothing really over the top. Doesn't have any canopies, which definitely shows its age, but I know Jacksonville is proposing a potential roof for the stadium, or even a partial roof like the one we've seen in Miami they've done in recent years. So be interested to see what happens with this stadium going forward. Certainly don't think the Jaguars are leaving Jacksonville anytime soon, as was rumored for a while. But yeah, overall I like Everbank Field here. Seems like a nice place to watch a game. So moving along to number 21 now, we'll stay right in Florida with the aforementioned Miami Dolphins, and this is, I believe, Hard Rock Stadium. Yes, so this stadium has hosted the Super Bowl several times, only once since the renovation, when this was Super Bowl 54, when the Kansas City Chiefs played the San Francisco 49ers, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid's first Super Bowl win together. But this stadium is certainly much improved from pre-renovation to post-renovation. They have this canopy now covering the fan base, so if they're playing in a really hot game in September, the fans aren't exposed to the dreadful South Florida heat, and if it happens to be a rainy day, the fans aren't exposed to any rain. Semi-climate controlled. I wouldn't say it is an outright climate controlled environment. It is still very much an outdoor stadium. They just threw a very large roof over top of the fans. So for the fans, it feels like a dome stadium, but for the players still on the field, they're playing outdoors. It's a nice balance. It certainly works for South Florida. So I think this one's pretty middle of the pack. It is one of the older stadiums, built originally in 1987, but you really can't tell from looking at it nowadays. They've really done their work on this one. certainly could be a good blueprint, like I mentioned, for Jacksonville as well. That being said, we'll move right along to number 20, and this is the third and final team in the state of Florida, all three of them back to back here, and that is Raymond James Stadium. Certainly iconic due to the pirate ship in the back of the end zone. Um, and this is another one of those stadiums that doesn't have an upper deck in either of the end zones, which I kind of like in this scenario. It gives it a very, like for these Florida teams, I feel like it works, much like with Jacksonville, but even more so here, honestly. Just gives it a really nice symmetrical look when you look at it from the outside. Like the two sidelines are very prominent, definitely three decks there it looks like, but you can see pretty much straight into the stadium from either side, and I do like that. Gives them a ton of room for a nice open scoreboard. Definitely get some palm trees there as well. Give it a nice Central Florida vibe. Of course, the pirate ship, absolutely iconic, but yeah, seems like a pretty chill place to watch a game. Seems like there's not a bad seat in the house here either. Like the layout in terms of the sight lines, the two sidelines with the upper decks. Seems like they're very much square on the field, not too much poor sight lines going on here. So that being said, I don't think Tampa Bay has one of the better fan bases in the NFL. I think that's the case with all three of the Florida teams. Honestly, out of the three Florida teams, Jacksonville might honestly have the best fans, as crazy as that is. But love to hear that debate down in the comments. So we'll move along here, try to keep this going. We're already at almost pushing an hour already. We're not even halfway there. It just shows I could really talk about these all day. But number 19 now. This one's one that I think people probably would be surprised is hasn't been mentioned already, and that's the Buffalo Bills Stadium, formerly Ralph Wilson Field. I forget what it's called now, but named for many years after their former owner, Highmark Stadium. Now, this is one that it is an older stadium, and it's not really one of those older stadiums that is like a vintage, like sort of historic stadium. It's kind of one of those older stadiums that's like the NFL is kind of trying to just push out of the picture, and Buffalo is another team that does have a new stadium on the way coming in just a few seasons. I believe it's going to open the same year as the new Titan Stadium, but honestly, the Bills Stadium here does have a lot of personality to it, and absolutely Bills Mafia is a huge factor in that. This seems like a very just fun and exciting place to watch a game on a Sunday. Tailgating atmosphere, probably one of the best in the entire National Football League, if not the best. So many, seems like there's a crazy story going on every time the Bills play a home game, but in terms of the structure itself, I really don't think it's that bad either, and I feel like it plays really well into the Bills fan base. So Buffalo has more of an old school kind of stadium where it feels more like a college stadium, if I'm being honest, just looking at pictures of it. It's more like built outwards rather than upwards. And I feel like for the Bills fans, like it just works. It really does just work, especially when we get to the December and January games and they're playing in the elements, they're playing in the snow. The stadium just kind of has one large lower bowl, and then on the sidelines it does have an upper deck, it looks like, but for the most part, it really is just one large lower bowl that just goes out wide and definitely gives it a nice sort of college football kind of vibe to it. And I think it really stands out compared to a lot of these other NFL stadiums because it's just it's from a different time. It's a stadium out of time. It really is representative of a different era. And of course, there's going to be one huge stadium later on near the top of this list, absolutely is historic, that has the same sort of layout and gets a lot of praise because of that. But I feel like Buffalo's stadium really doesn't, even though it's built largely the same way as that stadium. So Highmark Stadium coming in at number 19, I think it really is pushing a middle of the pack NFL stadium. The environment's fantastic, and I think it's uniquely structured. While it isn't something that is one of the more state-of-the-art facilities in the NFL, it's unique. A lot of these stadiums that are newer they all look a lot very similar. They look a lot like the same. They feel very similar. You watch them on TV, you can't really tell too much of the difference, but watch a game at Buffalo, you notice the difference. So now moving on to number 18, and this is a stadium that I have seen from the outside. I have not been in it though. Sorry, I just needed to take a little bit of water there talking about all these NFL stadiums. So number 18 is Gillette Stadium of the New England Patriots. Now, this stadium is certainly very unique as it's in Foxborough, Massachusetts. It's sort of halfway between Boston, Massachusetts, and Providence, Rhode Island. So certainly representative of the New England name as the team suggests, but it's in a suburb for the most part. It's just kind of a small town. It doesn't even feel like a particularly large suburb at that. Foxborough isn't like this massive area where you have people from all around New England coming to do business on a regular basis. It's not like some huge business hub where people are going to work every day. It really does have kind of a small town vibe, and then you'll just be driving down this road. It feels like you're driving down a neighborhood in a small country town, and then, gee, all of a sudden there's an NFL stadium. Kind of just pops up out of nowhere there. So definitely think it's very unique in that aspect. And honestly, in hindsight, after making this list, perhaps this one's even a little bit underrated, but seems like a great, just unique atmosphere. It's definitely something different from the rest of these NFL stadiums. It's not surrounded by highways, but it doesn't really need to be because it's just kind of off doing its own thing. It's not in a very high traffic area, but at the same time, that really lets it just kind of exist as its own thing. I don't really know how else to describe it. It kind of just feels like its own world. You're at Patriot Place, as they call it. It does feel like its own place. And in terms of the structure itself, it is very unique in the sense that they have, I don't even know what you call it, like that where the tunnel the players come out of is kind of just like behind the end zone. See if I can get some pictures here to describe it better to you guys. But Gillette Stadium, so it has like that lighthouse, obviously fitting very much with that New England theme, but behind the one end zone, just a huge wide walkway where seems like in any other NFL stadium, that'd be prime real estate to put some seats. I guess that is a bit of a knock against it, that it would be a nice place to have some seats for some fans, but it does also set it apart because it does, like, you notice that watching games, like, yeah, that's Gillette Stadium. It has that huge walkway behind the end zone. And I do know they are going to be expanding their Jumbotron. I believe it's going to go all the way over top of that walkway now, so certainly worth keeping an eye on that. But in terms of the sight lines, it's not bad. The rest of the stadium is really pretty plain Jane. Kind of is just a bowl going around the rest of the stadium. Otherwise, the remaining 3/4 of the stadium looks like just has bam, 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 3 levels. Not really too much to it. It is themed with the red and blue pretty well. Certainly feels like this is the home of the New England Patriots. Doesn't just feel like some gray slab of concrete like a MetLife Stadium or a Paycor Stadium, but yeah, definitely like Gillette Stadium. Definitely has a nice vibe to it. The Boston fans are certainly a rowdy bunch, but they care. They care. They certainly care about their team. So, you know, at the very least, you're going to have some passion at this stadium. Not necessarily one I would want to go to because of the Boston fans. There's not really too many fan bases I particularly have a distaste for, but Boston probably might be that one. I can get along just fine with New York fans, Dallas fans, um, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Cleveland for sure, any other passionate fan base you can name, but Boston's just, I don't know, they just seem like a very rowdy bunch from at least the ones I've experienced, so don't know how I'd feel about walking into their den, but maybe that's how they like it, so moving right along now, we'll go to number 17, and at 17 I have Ford Field in Detroit. And this is, I believe, our first dome stadium on this list. Now, this stadium is located right in downtown Detroit. Take that for however you want to take that. It is a very central location, though. I'll give it that. Right near the river on the border with Canada. And it's honestly one that's held up pretty well. This is kind of one of the more underrated stadiums, I would say, in the NFL. doesn't really get the love for Super Bowl nods, which I really haven't mentioned here before, but a lot of the reasons some of these teams are building new stadiums is they want to host the Super Bowl, which Detroit did in the mid 2000s right after Ford Field was built, but haven't gotten it back since, and I don't think they will get it back, at least for a while, just because of it being in Detroit. Not really somewhere NFL owners and execs want to go in the beginning of February. That being said, it's a nice stadium. Certainly seems like a good atmosphere to watch a game. You watch a game in Detroit on TV. It certainly feels unique. Certainly feels like it stands out. They have that giant Pepsi pillar in the corner. I don't know why, but that's always been a consistent thing with Ford Field and certainly stood out to me. Um, like the design on the outside for sure, and on the inside, seems like the sight lines are pretty solid. Do have some natural light creeping in as well, which is always a good thing for a dome stadium, I feel. And it is a well-enforced fixed roof, not one of the more, not like an inflatable stadium like we used to see with like the Metrodome or the Indianapolis Colts old stadium. Um, yeah, definitely one if you. I will say, like going to the stadium in person, if I did ever go here, I imagine it would feel a lot like going to an NBA game, just like a basketball arena. But that's not a bad thing, especially in Detroit, in Michigan in the winter. You don't want to be exposed to the elements. Um, So yeah, certainly one of the more underrated stadiums in the NFL, and don't think it gets its due enough. I would love to see a game here someday as well. I'd love to see a game at all these stadiums, of course, but Ford Field especially just always sort of struck a chord with me. Get to see it every Thanksgiving as well. I'm sure that helps. But moving on to number 16, and this is the Arizona Cardinals Stadium. I forget what it's called now. It used to be University of Phoenix Stadium. It is now known as State Farm Stadium. So this stadium was built in 2006, and looking at it from the outside, it looks just kind of like a tin can. I mean that with no disrespect. It's just entirely silver. I'm sure the fact that it's in the desert definitely plays a factor into that. And this does have a retractable roof. Although I will say it is in Glendale, Arizona, so it's not very central to the people who live in the Phoenix area. So maybe a bit of a point against it in that regard, but does have the unique ability for sure of being able to roll the field out and have it just bake in that Arizona sun before being able to roll it back into the playing field or playing surface, I guess I should say. This stadium has hosted the Super Bowl now 3 times, so we had Super Bowl 42 with the Giants and the Patriots, of course, the nearly perfect season for New England. We had the Super Bowl 49 after the 2014 season between the Seahawks and the New England Patriots, the Malcolm Butler game, and then just this past season, Super Bowl 57 between the Chiefs and the Eagles. So 3 amazing Super Bowls. That's got to count for something, but seems like just in terms of the stadium itself, seems like a solid stadium. Definitely seems like one of the modern stadiums that really set the tone for the super stadiums that would follow soon, shortly thereafter. It does have the retractable roof, but even when it is closed, do have some natural light creeping in there. All the seats decked out in red, so certainly positive there as well. But really nothing too over the top, which honestly make that sound like it's a bad thing, but it keeps the focus on the action on the field, and I do like that. So seems like the sightlines are here pretty good as well. Not really too many seats in the upper deck of the end zone, if at all. Seems like it's very limited. So certainly doesn't look like there's a bad seat in the house. It looks like a lot of standing room seats here as well, which is interesting. Haven't really noticed that with some of the other stadiums, but seems like Arizona does have a lot of space for fans to just hang out. Okay, so moving along to number 15, now in the top half of stadiums, and we will go to Cleveland for this one with the Browns. Their stadium being First Energy Bank Stadium, I want to say it is, or I guess, no, it's actually just called Cleveland Brown Stadium right now. I guess they lost their naming rights. So this stadium, absolutely the fans bring this stadium up a lot. Cleveland, the Dog Pound, one of the better fan bases in the NFL, but this is one of the more just straightforward designs in terms of how the stadium is constructed. It is one of those ones where it doesn't really have the connected end zones, but that could be a good thing to a degree. I don't like how blocked off the upper decks are, like I mentioned, where if you go up the wrong set of stairs, you're kind of screwed. You have to go back down and walk around and then go back up again. And well, there's 30 minutes of your time. You might have missed kickoff by that point. And I know, don't be a dummy. Just take the right stairs the first time. But for as expensive as these projects are, that really shouldn't be an issue. So this stadium is in a great location as well, right on Lake Erie. Certainly great for the pre-game shots of the stadium with that lake in the background, or if you flip it around the other way, you get downtown Cleveland in the shot as well, which it is right near downtown Cleveland. Really premier real estate, or as premier as you could get for Cleveland, Ohio. And the fan base certainly brings this up a notch, and you have this just absolutely decked out in orange seats. Love to see that. Certainly makes it stand out from its Ohio brethren in Cincinnati. And it seems like the sight lines are very good at the stadium, certainly more so than the Cincinnati Bengals stadium. Doesn't really look like there's a bad seat in the house here. So props to Cleveland. You guys made it into the top half. Um, Not really too much else to say with this stadium. Just looks like an all-around fun place to be. Now moving on to number 14, we have staying in the AFC North, formerly Heinz Field, no longer Heinz Field, but this is a stadium well known for the iconic ketchup bottles, located right along the Three Rivers in Pittsburgh, right in downtown, next to PNC Field, or PNC Park, I should say. Again, the seats, the yellow seats really do make this stadium stand out to me. Really, just you look at this and it's, yes, this is the Pittsburgh Steelers home. This is where they play. Um, And this is one where it does have sort of that same vibe as Cleveland and some of the other stadiums we'll look at built in the early 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s, where the sections are kind of disjointed. The upper deck doesn't connect. But that being said, Pittsburgh's is unique because on the side facing the river, it doesn't have an upper deck at all. It just has the scoreboard and the two ketchup bottles, of course. And gives it that open air feel while at the same time still has a high seating capacity, still has fantastic sight lines on both of the sidelines, and it looks like I would love to have actually been to the stadium just so I know this, but it looks like the remainder of the upper deck, or what is the three pillars of the upper deck, it looks like they are connected. So if you are going to a seat in the upper deck, you could take, it looks like they have stairwells and ramps on the outside, so it doesn't really impact the seating too much, but it leaves bridges available for the upper deck to really be connected. So you get the benefit of having the fantastic sight lines of the stadium, the upper deck not being connected, but at the same time, still have that open air feel in the end zone looking at the rivers, the colored seats, the downtown location. Yeah, it's a fantastic stadium, really is. And honestly, I think this one could even be above the next one. Pittsburgh definitely I think could be, but Cleveland as well I think is very similar to the next one. And that's my hometown team, the Philadelphia Eagles, coming in at number 13. Now, funny enough, like growing up, I never was a huge fan of Lincoln Financial Field itself. Always I always wished I was able to see a game at Veterans Stadium. I'm like just young enough where I wasn't able to see the Vet in all of its glory, but the Link isn't a bad field by any means, and it's certainly grown on me over the years. Certainly seems like Jeffrey Lurie has kept up with the stadium in terms of renovations, although it was originally funded by the city, so even though Jeff Lurie does get to rake in all the profits from the stadium, he didn't pay for it, at least not entirely. But Lincoln Financial Field certainly has a lot of personality to it, I will say. At least compared, after going through some of these other stadiums, I will say that it is within the city of Philadelphia, right off of both I-95 and I-76, accessible by the subway as well. So pristine location, the entire South Philly sports complex. So you do have Citizens Bank Park and the Wells Fargo Center all right there. All four teams play in the same parking lot. So while it isn't the most special location within the city, it certainly stands out. And you see it as you're coming over the bridge from New Jersey. You see the three stadiums there, and the Veteran Stadium and the old Spectrum used to be in that same site as well. So certainly iconic. And I really don't think a lot of other cities do that, if many at all, where you have all the sports stadiums at the same spot, which is weird because for as many cities as there are that have 4-for-4 pro sports, you really don't see that. But looking at Lincoln Financial Field itself, one of the problems I had with this for many years was, as I mentioned, the upper deck wasn't connected. So you have three different parts of the upper deck, but you go up the wrong set of stairs, you can't get around. They have sort of rectified this recently where they've built bridges where it goes around in one direction, but there is still one segment where it's not connected. But at least now, if you go up the wrong way, there is a way you can get to where you need to be in a timely manner. So the sightlines, I will say, at Lincoln Financial Field are phenomenal. There is not a bad seat in the house at Lincoln Financial Field. You feel very close to the action, even in the upper level. You feel like you're right on top of the field. And they have the canopies over the sidelines, so you do have some protection from the elements if you're in the nosebleeds. They have the dark green, midnight green seats, so it feels like the Philadelphia Eagles Stadium. And even in the upper deck, you have the seats sort of arranged in the Philadelphia Eagles to look like the Philadelphia Eagles logo. So you have some black, white, and gray seats to really. It's shaped like the Philadelphia Eagles logo. You'd look if you saw a picture, but even because of the open corners, though, if you're tailgating or if you're going by on the highway or you're at a Phillies game in the parking lot or a Flyers game or a Sixers game, you can look through the corner of the stadium and see the Eagles emblem in the empty seats up there. So that's pretty cool. I will give it that. I noticed none of the other stadiums have that fact, or that feature, I should say. And it just feels like a great football stadium. It has just enough where you feel comfortable, but it's still about the action. It's still about what's going on the field. You have the two jumbotrons at either end zone, so no matter where you're sitting, you can see at least one of those. If you're sitting on the sideline, you can see both of them pretty easily. Yeah, Lincoln Financial Field, certainly one that has grown on me over the years, and certainly after going to MetLife and FedEx. Initially, after going to those two, I did like those stadiums better, funny enough, just because I'm like, oh, you can go all the way around up top, but come to appreciate the Link more over the years. It is very expensive to go there because of our fan base, but that is also the biggest thing with the stadium too, is the Eagles fans. And I know for an opposing fan base, it may not be the best idea to go to Lincoln Financial Field, but it's an awesome place to be for Eagles fans. There's so much passion here, especially compared to seeing the Eagles play on the road against other teams. Like, our fans just bring it on a different level compared to what I've seen. So I would love to go to a stadium like Cleveland's or Buffalo's because I'd love to see their fan bases at work as well. So that being said, we'll move right along to number 12, and that is Mile High Stadium in Denver. Now, Mile High Stadium is certainly a unique structure, of course, because of the altitude, but actually, funny enough, I just mentioned the thing about the Eagles having their logo on the seats, but the Broncos do actually have the same thing. They do have it just one time, though, above the end zone. The Eagles have it on both the sidelines, but Denver has a very fascinating design to their stadium. So they do have at one end zone a scoreboard with the Mile High Monument above it, which is iconic from the original stadium. And that is sort of on its own out, kind of gives you a bit of an open end zone, although the first few levels it looks like, so it looks like there's 4 levels, and the first 3 extend all the way around with that scoreboard being above it in the end zones, although there is a 4th level that kind of makes a horseshoe around the other 3/4 of the stadium. And it's weird because the other 3/4, the upper level kind of makes like this wave to it. I don't really know how to describe it. Like, it extends back, but then it comes forward, but then it goes back again. It gives it a really nice aesthetic, though, looking at it from the outside. I can't quite put my finger on what I love about this design, but it just looks cool looking at it from the outside. It looks unique. There isn't another NFL stadium that looks like Mile High Field. And I know it has the sponsorship now, but I'm going to still call it Mile High Field or Mile High Stadium, even though that was technically the name of their old home. And it does have a couple mini jumbotrons along the opposite side, just for the fans who are sitting below the large one. But got the navy blue seats. Feels like And the seat, you know what it is? The seats going up, it makes you feel like you're in the altitude. I don't know. You watch this game on TV, and it's like, yeah, I'm in the mountains watching the Denver Broncos right now. I don't know how else to put it, but they have a good mix and match of the navy blue and the orange here as well. Just a very unique structure here. And Denver does have a solid fan base as well, so that certainly helps. Great location in downtown Denver. This is another one I have seen from the outside. Um, Certainly accessible to much of the city around it, both by car and by foot and bike, I guess I should say. But yeah, love Mile High Stadium. Think it's definitely one that is one of the finer outdoor stadiums in the NFL for sure. A lot of the ones in the top 10 will be the fancy dome stadiums or the historic stadiums. So Mile High, though, out of the newer outdoor stadiums, it's probably the best. Well, it's near the best one. There is one more coming up that I haven't mentioned. It will be later on, though. So now, number 11, this is the final one before we get to the top 10. And I actually have been to this stadium even though I don't live near it. And that is NRG Stadium in Houston. I know it's a pretty random one for me to go to considering I live in Pennsylvania, but did go there last year when the Eagles and Texans played on a Thursday night game, just kind of on a whim with a buddy, but that was because the Texans were pretty bad, tickets were dirt cheap. It was while the Phillies were playing the Astros in the World Series too, so there was like that Philly-Houston dynamic going on at the time. Like, why not? It'd be fun. And it was fun. The Houston fans were actually really chill. They have, it's right next to the old Astrodome, which is still standing, but very unique atmosphere here where it's like, unlike most stadiums where you go through security and then immediately go through the ticket gate, in Houston, you go through the security outside and then you're still outside. You're still not in the stadium. And they just have this whole like tailgate setup out there, like with like, kind of like a fair almost. I don't really know how to describe it, but they had a ton of really cheap beer too. They had just like $2 Miller Lights for sale. So me and my buddy were like, all right, like wasn't planning on getting drunk, but why not? Instead of paying $15 for a beer inside, we'll take like 7 right now and I'll be feeling good by the time the game starts. But yeah, it was really chill. I got to talk to some of the Houston fans. Absolutely loved talking to you guys. It was awesome to see the Houston Texans fans, like just a really laid back bunch. Um, Got to see yeah, just some really just good down to earth people. Really was a good solid experience all around there. Um, and it wasn't really like an intense atmosphere. I mean, Houston wasn't a good team, so I'm sure it'd be different if they were near the top of the standings that season, but just an all around great time. And then you do get into the stadium itself and certainly feels like an NBA arena when you get in there. It feels like you're just at a basketball game going through the concourse, but concourse is pretty relaxed though as a result too. It is a newer stadium and definitely wide walkways, everything's bigger in Texas, but yeah, and then you get to the seats themselves and fantastic sight lines really no matter where you're at. And they have the retractable roof. It was closed when we were there. Seems like they keep it closed most of the time, but really you watch a game here on TV too. It just seems like a nice place to watch a game. Always has like I don't know, like the color of the grass or something. Like it always just has like a certain vibe to it. And then the roof, even when it's closed, it does let in some natural light too, so it doesn't feel like it's entirely just boxed in. And it has the two just massive jumbotrons above either end zone. Yeah, it's really solid stadium that has the colored seats with the dark blue and the red. This is the Houston Texans Stadium, the American flag and the Texas flag up top. Know where you're at. I mean, yeah, I love this place, and just looking at the layout of the seats, really no corner seats, but at the same time, it is an enclosed arena, so you can still go all the way around. Not a bad seat in the house, and absolutely loved watching a game there. It's fancy to a degree, like it's certainly you could tell a lot of thought was put into the design of the stadium, and it is a fantastic place to watch a game with a retractable roof, but at the same time, it doesn't feel too over the top like some of these other stadiums we will mention later on. And maybe that could even be a potential point in its favor. Granted, I haven't been to some of these other stadiums we're about to mention, but I absolutely love my experience at NRG Stadium. Would highly recommend anybody who has the chance to go there, especially if tickets are cheap while the Texans aren't that great. Give it a shot. It's a good time. Moving along to the top 10 now. So this top 10 is going to be a mix and match of the historic stadiums and the really new stadiums for the most part. So number 10, we'll start off with the historic one being the New Orleans Superdome. So the Superdome, of course, absolutely iconic in New Orleans for Louisiana. And the Superdome, I love, absolutely love the design of the Superdome from the outside. I love how it has that, like it curves in, then back out, then the dome. I don't know. It just looks so pleasing to the eye. And then there's really nothing on the outside of the stadium. But at the same time, like when it's lit up at night with the lights, like looks just as good, if not better, than it does during the day. And of course, was an absolute icon during Hurricane Katrina, housing so many people who lost their homes and was able to withstand that tragedy. Um, Granted, this is one of the more dated stadiums in the National Football League, and I will say the interior isn't overly impressive, although they are planning on hosting the Super Bowl again in a few seasons, and they plan on renovating it prior to that. So it looks like in a few years, the Superdome could be back on the map in a big way. It looks like they really have some big plans for the stadium, but as of right now, the interior really isn't anything too special. It certainly looks very dated on the inside, and probably that's the one thing that's holding it back. The sight lines don't look great. Looks like some of these upper level seats could be a little rough to be at, but it's to be expected for a stadium built in the mid 70s. So really one of the pioneers of the dome stadium in the NFL, along with the Astrodome, but gets a spot in the top 10 still. Despite the power going out in its last Super Bowl appearance, it's coming back. So keep on trucking, Superdome. Hope you stick around for a while. Certainly love to see a game there someday. Now looking at number 9 on the list, we will go stay in the NFC South, and this is a stadium that might be a little bit controversial to have this low. Granted, I haven't been there, but certainly one of the more state-of-the-art stadiums in the NFL, and that's the Atlanta Falcons' new home. I believe it's Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's a very unique structure, and I'd say it's one of the four newest stadiums, along with Minnesota, LA, and Las Vegas. I'd say they're like the four super stadiums of the NFL now, and you might even throw Dallas in there too. Of course, we haven't mentioned any of these stadiums yet, but we'll start with Atlanta and the Falcons Stadium. It really is unique because unlike the old Georgia Dome, it has that retractable roof now, and not just any retractable roof. It kind of retracts like a pizza, like it kind of splits off into triangles and opens up really fancy. And then it has on the inside of that roof immediately just one ring around and a huge just jumbotron going all the way around. So anywhere you're sitting in the stadium, you can see this inner ring of the jumbotron. And they do a good job with the red and black seats. Always love to see the colored seats. Um, it is interesting to see though that it seems like these sections, at least on the lower level, are very large. So certainly be curious to see if you're at one of the rear rows in this lower level what the sight lines look like. And then the upper levels it looks like are decently far away from the field. So certainly interesting to note that. And then on the sidelines it looks like it's just one lower level that goes really high up. So certainly a different design, but all in all, still a state-of-the-art stadium by all means. Um, okay, it looks like the lower level only goes up really high on the one side. Looks like on the other side it is more of a conventional just upper deck, but love the pattern of the red and black seats alternating between levels. Certainly has, even with the roof closed, a lot of natural light coming in. Love to see that. Definitely makes it feel less sterile compared to the Georgia Dome. Makes it feel more lively, like you're at a football game. So, and I have heard with this stadium too that the concession prices are actually surprisingly very reasonable, and it's very streamlined. Where like they're very big on like consumer analytics for getting people in and out of line quickly, trying to really optimize the customer experience. So, be interested to go to this stadium someday. Certainly seems like one that's going to be around for a very long time. So. This stadium, I'm sure some people probably would say it's the best one in the NFL right now, and I do have it at number 9, but could certainly change if I make a trip down to Atlanta someday to see this place in person, but just speaks to the incredible stadiums ahead here. Now, number 8 Another classic, Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City. I have seen this one from the outside as well. So Arrowhead is, of course, one of the oldest stadiums in the NFL, built in the 1970s, early 1970s at that. And I've always loved this stadium as ever since I was a kid. Just a very plain Jane kind of design, but it like masters that design. I don't really know how to put it. So it does go all the way around, but it's not like a typical bowl stadium. It kind of like stretches itself out on the sidelines, but then it narrows up for the upper deck on the end zone sides, but it's all just one piece of the upper level. Like the upper level kind of goes up and then it shrinks as it goes to the end zones. And then the ramps and the stairwells are all around the outside of the stadium so it doesn't break up the seating to get up and down the stadium. So I love that. It gives it that enclosed feel. And it's kind of not really near downtown Kansas City. It's surrounded by a parking lot. It is right next to the Royals ballpark, actually, though the Royals may be moving sometime in the near future. That being said, I do love the two pill-shaped scoreboards right above either end zone, and that's really all they got. Not a lot of digital graphics or advertisements in your face here. It's about the product on the field. It's an old school stadium. You're there to watch the Chiefs play, and boy, what a time too with the team they've had recently. So love Arrowhead Stadium, and Chiefs fans are certainly some of the more passionate ones in the NFL. They've set noise records at this stadium before, so yeah, would love to see a game at Arrowhead someday too. Seems it's one that I really hope sticks around for a long time, and certainly a unique design. Much like the Bills Stadium, this isn't the stadium I was alluding to earlier. This is a different design than the Bills sort of format, but there really isn't another stadium like Arrowhead in the NFL right now, so hope it's able to stand the test of time. Now, looking at number 7, we have this is the stadium I was talking about with the Buffalo Bills earlier, and that is none other than Lambeau Field in Green Bay. Now, I know this could be controversial to have Lambeau at number 7. And look, I mean, Lambeau, what else could we say? The frozen tundra, football icon. I know some people, just for the history, put it at number 1 alone. The fact that it's in Green Bay, so secluded from the rest of the football world. But I mean, there are just some absolutely modern marvels ahead on this list, so nothing against Lambeau, but it does have that more old school college football vibe to it. And I mean, come on, any football fan who's ever watched a game, they want to go to Lambeau Field. So has that old school feel with like the lower bowl that goes really far out. They have since added some upper level seating to Lambeau Field to help keep it modernized, but yeah, what else can I really say about this stadium? It really is just its own beast. There's nothing like it, and this is like the Wrigley Field of the NFL or the Fenway Park, like just absolutely iconic. And you know for a fact that Green Bay will never play in another stadium. The Packers will never leave Green Bay because of their ownership situation, and they'll always be at Lambeau Field. The Green Bay Packers and Lambeau Field, like they go together like the Chicago Cubs and Wrigley Field. It's part of that neighborhood. It's part of that culture. It's title town, you know. So I hope I get to Green Bay and see Lambeau for myself someday. But certainly just an absolute historic piece of architecture for the National Football League. Now on to number 6, and at number 6 we'll have Jerry World, Dallas Cowboys Stadium down there in Arlington. Now when this stadium came out, it probably was number 1. It really was like a stadium that revolutionized the stadium game in general. That massive scoreboard in the middle, like what else can I say? This is really something special. It goes from, I believe, 20-yard line to 20-yard line. Just if you're on the sideline, like how can you not look at that thing? You get a better view of the action on the field looking at the scoreboard than you do just looking down at the field in front of you, even though you're in person looking at the action itself. Then they do have sort of the same sort of hole in the sky that they had at the old Texas Stadium, but the twist this time is it does have a retractable roof that goes over the top, so if Dallas does want to hide themselves from the elements, they can close that up, but if they want God to look down on America's team, they can open that up. So it does have a lot of natural light coming in. It does have sort of an open end zone, a ton of windows there, and the exterior of the stadium with the gates and the pillars really just comes together really nice. Just a very clean look. Jerry sure does know how to pick his architects, so props to the guys who build AT&T Stadium. Is in Arlington, so kind of a central location between Fort Worth and Dallas. I guess that is a pro because people down there just driving to games anyways, pretty much 100%. So yeah, I mean, when the stadium came out, it probably would have been number one, but right now, there's just so many other great ones that have come out since that it's hard. It's really hard to pick these top 10. Like, all these stadiums really are great, like I said, but man, Cowboy Stadium really a modern marvel now. And the Eagles play there every single season, so definitely want to try to get there at some point. Looking forward to the top five now. At number five, we actually have the most expensive stadium in NFL history, and that is SoFi. And like I said earlier, I have been to SoFi Stadium and taken a tour of it. So I've gotten to go down on the field, into the locker rooms, seen all the different sections, but man, this stadium really is something else. And you know that Stan Kroenke, I will say too, he built this stadium with his own dime because otherwise the Rams likely would have stayed in St. Louis. The NFL wasn't going to fund the Rams going back to LA when the Raiders and Chargers definitely were in more of a dire stadium situation. But Stan Kroenke bought the land. He said, you know what, it's my land. I'm going to do with it what I want. The Rams are my team. We're going to move them there. And yeah, it sucks for the fans of St. Louis, but I'll give him props that he built this out of his own pocket and he went all out with it, and you can really, it really shows. So this thing's really going to become more of like an entertainment complex as the years go on. I went there in spring of 2021, so it wasn't really quite developed around the stadium yet, but the structure itself was absolutely in place. They played that 2020 season there without fans, so this was before they had fans in that stadium. This is before Super Bowl 56, but man, just an absolute modern marvel. Very similar to Cowboys Stadium, just looking at pictures. It has several different levels to the decks. There's probably a good 5 or 6 different levels for SoFi Stadium. Let me cite a picture here just so I can see it again. Yeah, there's like 5 different levels of seats here. Really remarkable stuff, and it has that iconic jumbotron in the middle. Kind of a mix between what Atlanta has going on and what Dallas has. Very large like Dallas, but still very much a ring like Atlanta's. So just one cohesive piece where if you're sitting in the upper deck, you can look at the outside of the ring, but if you're sitting in the lower deck, you could look at the inside of the ring. Really genius engineering on the part of the SoFi designers there. So this is also home to, of course, the Los Angeles Chargers, but as a result, it doesn't really feel like the Rams' home per se. You don't have the colored seats, very much a vanilla kind of design, which is unfortunate. I thought when the NFL went back to LA, they probably should have just stuck to the one team and tried to figure something out for the Chargers in San Diego, but what are we going to do? The Chargers are there now, and they've been very much enjoying it. Definitely seems like it's been a nice turn of the page for them moving into the stadium, new uniforms, new quarterback, Justin Herbert. They really turned the page from that San Diego era with Phillip Rivers. So that being said, SoFi does have it has a canopy roof, like it is a fixed roof, but the outside of the stadium is open. So it does have that beautiful Southern California weather coming in there, and it is built in. Primarily, it is 3 different structures, which I didn't know before I went there, but it's just built that way to try to withstand hurricanes and earthquakes. Sorry, not hurricanes. I meant earthquakes. Suppose it could help with hurricanes too, but Southern California, they do have their fair share of earthquakes, and the fact that it is 3 different structures just helps it absorb the shock of that better, which really didn't consider. So glad that the engineers really thought that one through. But the exterior of the stadium, it's solid. Definitely looks fancy, but you look at it from certain angles, it does definitely is reminiscent of an airport terminal, which I think is funny, but absolutely the gold standard of NFL stadiums right now, although we do have 4 more to go still. Looking at number 4 now, also opened up in 2020, tied with SoFi as the newest NFL stadium, and that is Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, the Death Star, if you will. And it really is a coin flip between these 2 stadiums as to which one really is the better stadium, but I give the nod to Allegiant here, and this is one I've seen from the outside as well. I give it the nod to Allegiant for a few reasons. One, looking at it from the outside, they call it the Death Star for a reason. This thing is really cool to look at. Like, it just looks sick looking at it from the outside, especially at night with the lights on it, with the white lights going down the side, with the contrast with the black. And it looks like the Oakland Raiders colors too. You could tell Mark Davis really had a lot of input on this one. And then it has the orange Allegiant logo, which even kind of pops on the background. I like how that looks with the sun there. Very fitting for Las Vegas. Get to the inside, it does have a fixed roof, which doesn't really let in a ton of natural light, but it does have windows along the end zone with the victory torch there, with the Las Vegas skyline in the background, right near the Vegas Strip too. It's not directly on the Vegas Strip like the Vegas Golden Knights Arena, but if you're walking down the Vegas Strip, you can clearly see Allegiant Stadium. Oh, it's right across the street over there. Like if I wanted to walk there, I could, which is definitely a factor in it being ranked above SoFi. SoFi's kind of just out in the middle of nowhere in the middle of LA in Inglewood, but LA itself is a very spread out city, so that certainly plays a factor. But also looking at Allegiant, I give it props too for the all black seats. Like this is the Las Vegas Raiders stadium. You watch a game there or you go to a game there, it feels like you're watching the Raiders play, which because SoFi has to juggle two teams, it doesn't really have that home field advantage feel that Allegiant does. And I'm certainly excited to see the Super Bowl being played in Allegiant this season. Um, Absolutely another state-of-the-art stadium as well. Really one of the cream of the crop. Now we're getting to the top three. So number three, this is actually our last outdoor stadium. And this is one that's actually been open for about 20 years now, and that is Seattle with, used to be called Quest Field, but what's it called now? I know it was CenturyLink for a while. I don't think it's still called that. Lumen Field in Seattle. Now this stadium, obviously the noise here is a huge factor, and the 12th man gives it a lot of credit there for its ranking. Also in a great location in downtown Seattle, very central to the rest of the happenings in the city. But I love the design of the stadium itself, though. Obviously the two canopies along the sidelines and trapping the noise, which was kind of like a happy accident. But then I don't even know what you want to call them, the railings going along the top of the canopies, at the center of the canopies. I don't know what you even call those. Somebody who understands architecture better than me will be able to tell you, but they didn't have to put that on there, but it's just a nice look that really brings it together. Then they have their upper deck, which goes kind of in that horseshoe design, but then they have that open end zone on the one side, which I do love. And it's kind of, I think that section's called the Hawk's Nest. It's kind of shaped like a little triangle, but then at the top of the triangle, they have like a rectangular scoreboard. Kind of just looks like Times Square, honestly, looking at the scoreboard itself, but it just fits perfectly coming off of that triangle shaped section at the back of the one end zone, and it does give you the open air feel to look at the rest of the city of Seattle. So absolutely love the design of the stadium because it's one where it came out at a time where a lot of those stadiums in the early 90s and early 2000s kind of had just, they were very similar to each other. So like they had that Lincoln Financial Field design where I feel like that's very much like the new cookie cutter stadium, much like Veterans Stadium was the old cookie cutter kind of stadium. A lot of the stadiums look like Lincoln Financial Field built around that time. So like Cleveland or Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, or if they didn't look like that, they look like Baltimore Stadium. And you have stadiums like Baltimore's and Jacksonville's and Carolina's. They all look very similar to each other. But Lumen Field came out during the same time, and it doesn't look anything like the rest of those. It really stands out on its own and really stands the test of time. Um, just an iconic stadium, honestly. Like, you look at this, like, if you just gave me a silhouette of this stadium, I'd be like, that's Lumen Field or Quest Field, whatever you want to call it. Um, like, you know exactly what that is. And the home field advantage, the great location, seats are colored to theme with Seattle, the 12th man. Man, what else can I say about this stadium? Would love to see a game there someday. I know the Eagles do play there this year, but doubt I'd be able to go see them play at CenturyLink. Not CenturyLink. There's so many names for this field. Lumen Field. Excuse me. But definitely at some point want to keep that one on the bucket list for sure. Looking now at our top two. So if you narrowed it down, you know the top two are Indianapolis and Minnesota, and I will put Indianapolis at number two. Indianapolis has really a lot of everything going for it. Lucas Oil Stadium, one, they've kept the name the same, unlike Seattle. That's not the reason it's ahead of Seattle. Granted, it does have a bit of a warehouse look from the outside, and I know that could certainly be hit or miss for some people, but like how the roof's kind of on an angle and it just opens up like right along the walls there. Definitely fits with the city of Indianapolis. Feels like it doesn't look out of place at all with the surrounding architecture. And with this stadium too, the windows are retractable along with the roof. And when the roof retracts, it does have pillars still going parallel to the end zone throughout. And that's where they have their banners hanging up. I think that's very fascinating design quirk. And the banners themselves are kind of on an angle because of how the roof's shaped. I do like that. As I mentioned, the retractable window behind the end zone gives you a good view of the skyline, or when it's closed, a lot of natural light coming in. Have the scoreboard right next to the window, which I've honestly always liked. It's not really distracting too much from the action on the field, but if you want to look over at the scoreboard, it's there for you. So, other thing with Lucas Oil, it is in a very central spot in Indianapolis, so I know that was a big thing when they hosted the Super Bowl back in '46 when it was the Giants and the Patriots the second go round. People who went to the Super Bowl, yeah, Indianapolis in February, not the most pleasant place to be, but you could walk right out of that stadium and immediately have amenities around you, whether it's restaurants, bars, hotels, wherever you want. Like, you're right in the middle of downtown Indianapolis, so everything is very accessible to the stadium. And of course, the blue seats feels like the Colts Stadium. Absolutely love it. And they do have the logo in the seats as well, like the Eagles and the Broncos. So there's three teams now. Finally, looking at our last stadium, that being US Bank Stadium in Minnesota, another one of these new super stadiums. This was actually built before Atlanta, Vegas, and Los Angeles, but this one was actually built on the site of the old Metrodome, hence why the Vikings played at the University of Minnesota Stadium for a few seasons there. But this one is a really unique design. It has a fixed roof, but half of it is covered entirely, whereas the other half is just windows and glass for the most part. So you have a ton of natural light coming in, and I mean a ton of natural light coming in. It feels like you're playing outside when you watch a game on TV. It looks like they're playing outside. But then if you're at this game at the stadium, it looks like you can just, even if you're on the upper level, especially if you're on the upper level, you can look out and see the skyline of Minneapolis because it is right in downtown Minneapolis, right near St. Paul as well. Very accessible to the rest of the city, and it is shaped like a Viking ship, so I love that. Gives it a ton of personality, and the purple seats, no doubt about it, this is the Minnesota Vikings home. And then you have a nice big scoreboard behind the end zone, but nothing too distracting though. Honestly, I do think that some of those huge scoreboards can be a little bit distracting, like with a Dallas or SoFi or Atlanta even. Can just take away from the action a little bit. But here, just has the scoreboard behind the end zone. It's there if you want it, but you're focused on the field like that. So Minnesota comes in at number one. So that's all I've got on the stadiums. Geez, this video is almost an hour and 45 minutes long, but this was definitely one I had on the back burner. Something more casual. I was experimenting with doing like a iMovie kind of thing with this where I could show you guys the pictures, but one, that could get me into copyright trouble, and two, I found myself just spending so much time and effort trying to do that where there was less time I was actually like thinking about things I wanted to talk about with the stadiums themselves. So that's all I've got for the stadium videos. Look forward to continuing the series on our team previews as we go along, and like I've mentioned, I just have so many other video ideas for the National Football League that I would love to share. So look forward to talking to you guys again soon. This was definitely a fun one. If you watch this whole thing, congratulations for bearing with me, but that's all I got. Catch you in the next one. Take it easy, everybody.